The first scream doesn't come from a patient. It comes from the waiting room, sharp, panicked, contagious. A second later, the hospital alarms start chiming in mismatched tones, like they can't agree on what kind of emergency this is. In the corridor outside Trauma 2, a quiet night shift nurse adjusts her gloves with steady hands while people run past her. A man in a suit, FBI, badge still clipped to his belt, barks orders into his radio, eyes cutting right through her as if she's part of the wall. Then the lights flicker, someone yells, "Gun!" and the crowd surges toward the exits. The nurse doesn't move. She watches the flow like she's counting it. She reaches into her pocket, presses two fingers to a small, flat device, and sends a signal so subtle no one notices. Except the people who were never supposed to be here. And in the next few minutes, everyone who underestimated her is going to learn what panic really looks like when it's controlled. The hospital at night had its own weather. Not silence, never that, but a steady pressure of sound. Ventilators breathing for people who could not, carts rolling over seams in the floor, a distant phone ringing too long before someone answered it. Fluorescent lights hummed with the patience of machines that did not care who was tired. She moved through it without urgency. Not slow either, measured. Her badge said registered nurse, clipped where policy required it. The letters had been rubbed dull by years of fabric and disinfectant. She checked a drip rate, adjusted a monitor, and pulled a blanket higher on an older man who shivered despite the heat. When he reached for her wrist, frightened and half aware, she waited until his grip softened before stepping away. "Thank you," he said, unsure if the word still belonged to him. She nodded once. No smile. Smiles invited questions. At the nurse's station, a new chart appeared in the rack, handwritten addendum, rushed. She read it without comment, then rewrote the medication schedule in cleaner ink so the next person wouldn't make a mistake. Down the hall, someone laughed too loudly. It cut off when a supervisor passed. The doors at the far end opened and men came in who did not belong to the rhythm. They wore suits that were almost casual, almost tired, but the shoes were wrong, too quiet, too new. One flashed a badge at the charge nurse without slowing. Another spoke into his radio in a voice trained to sound calm while pushing people out of the way. "Federal," someone whispered. The word moved faster than they did. A patient was being transferred into critical care under escort. Curtains were drawn. A portable camera went up on a tripod that didn't match hospital equipment. The charge nurse tried to ask questions and got a hand in the air in response. Hospital security drifted closer, then stopped, unsure where their authority ended. She watched from the side of the corridor, hands folded, eyes steady. The FBI agent, she read it from the jacket cut, not the badge, pointed down the hall. "We need this clear, staff only, no exceptions." She stepped back with the others, no protest, no curiosity. When the flow moved, she moved with it, then stopped where the light from the ICU didn't quite reach. From there, she could see the doors. From there, she could see the waiting room reflected faintly in the glass. A child cried. A television played the same headline on a loop with the sound off. She checked a supply cabinet that no one else checked on night shift. Gauze was stocked too neatly. Someone had been here recently, careful enough to be obvious. She closed the cabinet and made a note she did not write down. An alarm chimed, minor, easily ignored. A door sensor reset itself. A supervisor waved it off. The agents didn't look up. She adjusted her gloves. A man in scrubs she didn't recognize passed twice in 3 minutes, walking too fast toward nowhere. She didn't stop him. She memorized his stride. Another face appeared near the elevators, watching the guards instead of the floor numbers. None of it was proof. All of it was friction. At the nurse's station, a junior resident asked her if she could cover a break. She said yes. When he thanked her, she was already walking. The night pressed closer. The hospital breathed faster. Down the corridor, a raised voice snapped, sharp with command. Radios crackled. Somewhere near the waiting room, a chair scraped hard enough to hurt someone's ears. She paused, listening not to the noise but to the pattern beneath it. Panic, she knew, did not arrive all at once. It was guided. It was fed. She slid her badge into place, smoothed her uniform, and took her position where she could see the most and be noticed the least. For now, that was enough. By the time the FBI finished reshaping the floor, the hospital no longer felt like a hospital. Portable barriers appeared where there had been none. Doors that usually stayed unlocked for codes and emergencies were suddenly guarded by men with radios and unfamiliar posture. The smell changed too, less antiseptic, more cold air dragged in from outside every time a restricted entrance opened. They called it a perimeter. Hospital administration called it temporary cooperation. The nurse watched it form from inside. The protected patient was moved into a negative pressure ICU room, not because he needed it, but because it could be isolated. Curtains stayed closed. A single agent stood inside the room at all times, back to the wall, eyes on the door. Two more posted outside. Another pair rotated near the stairwell, pretending not to block it. None of them looked at the ceiling cameras. A meeting happened at the nurse's station without her being invited to it. She heard fragments while refilling a sanitizer dispenser. "We'll handle security. Just keep your staff compliant. No wandering, no freelancing." The word freelancing lingered. A supervisor glanced at her, then away. The message passed without being spoken. "Don't complicate this." She complied. She brought meds when asked. She logged vitals with precision. When an agent snapped at a respiratory therapist for lingering too long near the room, she redirected the therapist without argument, placed herself between them for exactly 3 seconds, then moved on. It looked like de-escalation. It was also data. The agents trusted radios more than eyes. They trusted their own spacing but ignored the way hospital corridors funneled people. They stood where they were trained to stand, not where crowds actually moved. She noticed which doors they locked and which they couldn't. Fire code overruled federal authority, at least on paper. She noticed which exits stayed unguarded because they looked inconvenient. She noticed how often agents touched their earpieces when alarms chimed, and how rarely they verified the source. The bubble was tight around the patient. Everywhere else, it thinned. A family member argued at the front desk about visitation. Voices rose. Security stepped in late. An agent watched, annoyed, but didn't intervene, not his scope. She intervened instead. She didn't raise her voice. She acknowledged fear, redirected anger, gave the family something small to hold on to: time, information, a chair pulled closer to a wall. The argument deflated. The agent looked relieved, then dismissed her from his attention entirely. Good. At 01:17, an elevator stalled between floors for 40 seconds, not long enough to trigger a response, long enough to frustrate people inside. She felt it more than heard it, an absence in the building's rhythm. At 01:22, a transport request appeared in the system for a patient who was not scheduled to move. The name was close to another name, one letter off. The room number was wrong by a digit. She canceled it without comment and flagged it as clerical error. At 01:29, a man wearing hospital scrubs but no badge tried to enter the restricted corridor. An agent blocked him, irritated. The man apologized too quickly and left in the opposite direction he should have taken. She watched him go. She did not follow. Federal presence created gravity. People clustered at the edges of it, some curious, some afraid, some looking for gaps. The FBI saw threats in sharp lines: armed, unarmed, authorized, unauthorized. She saw gradients. The charge nurse finally approached her. "They want us to limit movement. You're assigned here for now." The area she was assigned to covered 3 corridors, 2 stairwells, and the waiting room access point. She nodded. Understood. The waiting room was restless. Phones glowed. A television showed a press conference from earlier in the day, volume muted, captions lagging behind the speaker's mouth. A rumor moved through the chairs like static. Someone important is here. Something bad is about to happen. Fear didn't need details. An agent entered, scanning faces like inventory. When his eyes passed over her, they slid off. She was a uniform, a role, a function. She used that. She adjusted chairs to open walking lanes. She asked a volunteer to move a coffee cart that blocked an exit. She lowered the volume on the television by 2 increments, not enough to draw attention, enough to reduce agitation. None of it was heroic. All of it mattered. At 0141, the fire panel chimed again. A different zone this time, reset, logged, forgotten. The agent cursed under his breath. Your building's falling apart. Our building is doing what it's designed to do, she said evenly. He stared at her, surprised she'd spoken at all. Then he shook his head and turned away. The bubble held, but pressure was building outside it, invisible to the people standing at its center. She felt it in the way footsteps sped up, in the way voices overlapped instead of taking turns, in the way people started standing instead of sitting, bags clutched close, eyes on exits. This was the phase everyone underestimated, not the threat, the reaction. She moved closer to the waiting room doors and took up a position that looked accidental. From there she could see the corridor reflections, the elevator bank, the stairwell landing. She counted breaths. She counted seconds. And she waited for the first thing to go wrong loudly enough that no one could ignore it. The first real crack wasn't dramatic. It was a clipboard. Someone left it on a chair near the waiting room entrance. Blank forms on top, no department header, no name. It didn't belong to any service in the hospital. She knew because she had filled out all of them at some point in her career. She picked it up, flipped through the pages once, then slid it under the desk without comment. When a man came back 5 minutes later and glanced at the chair, she saw his jaw tighten before he walked away. He didn't ask for it. At the elevators, a small knot of people had gathered. The stalled car had released its passengers, but the frustration lingered. Voices overlapped. One woman said she felt dizzy. A man insisted the doors had closed too fast. Someone mentioned smoke. There was no smoke. She stepped in before the words could spread. "Let's sit you down," she said to the woman, already guiding her toward a chair. "You're safe. Take a breath with me." The woman mirrored her without thinking. Others followed, unconsciously slowing as well. The knot loosened. From the corridor, an FBI agent watched, expression tight. He didn't intervene. He logged something into his phone instead. At 0153, the fire panel chimed a third time. Different zone again. This time, it didn't reset on its own. The tone was still minor, informational, not evacuation, but people heard alarm and stopped hearing anything else. A man stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. The sound cracked across the room. "Is this a drill?" someone asked. "No drills," another answered. "Not with feds here." She felt the shift then, the exact moment anxiety crossed into readiness. Bodies angled toward exits. Phones came up, recording nothing in particular. A rumor surfaced fully formed as if it had been waiting. "They're locking us in." The sentence moved faster than she could stop it. She raised her voice just enough to be heard without sounding like authority. "No one is locked in. Fire exits stay open by law." It helped. Not enough. The FBI agent spoke into his radio, clipped and irritated. "Control, what's with the panel? We're getting chatter out here." Chatter, she thought, was one word for it. A security guard jogged past her toward the panel, nearly colliding with a transport tech pushing an empty gurney. The gurney squealed as it turned. The sound made people flinch. She noticed something else then. A man near the vending machines wasn't reacting. While everyone else tracked the alarm or the agent, his eyes stayed on the crowd itself, on where people moved, not why. When someone stood, he shifted. When someone turned, he leaned, steering without touching. She caught his eye, just long enough. He looked away immediately. At the ICU doors, raised voices broke through the corridor. An agent was arguing with a doctor who wanted access to the protected patient's chart. "Federal hold," the agent said. "This is a hospital," the doctor replied. The exchange drew attention. Phones tilted. The bubble tightened inward and the pressure outside it increased. She moved. Not toward the argument, toward the seam it created. She redirected foot traffic with small gestures, guided a family down an alternate corridor under the pretense of coffee, positioned a rolling vitals stand across a narrowing passageway. Soft barriers. Temporary, legal. At 0201 a child screamed, not fear, pain, a fall. Someone tripped in the shuffle and went down hard, skinning a knee, shocking everyone around them. The scream punched through the room and flipped a switch. People surged. "Back up," a guard yelled. It did nothing. The man by the vending machines moved with the flow but never lost balance. He said something to the person beside him. She couldn't hear it, but the effect was immediate. Two people changed direction, heading for a side exit that led toward a stairwell already under strain. That stairwell couldn't handle a rush. She felt it then, clear and sharp. This wasn't random panic. It was guided escalation. She stepped into the path of the moving crowd, not blocking, not commanding. She planted herself at an angle and used the one thing panic still responded to: certainty. "Stop," she said, not loud but final. "There's a child on the floor." It cut through. People hesitated. Hesitation slowed momentum. She knelt, already assessing the injury, already controlling the moment. The child's mother dropped beside her, sobbing with relief. Behind them, the man near the vending machine slipped away. She didn't chase him. At the fire panel, the alarm finally cleared. The tone stopped. Silence rushed in to replace it, heavy and unnatural. People exhaled. Nervous laughter started. The FBI agent wiped his face. "False alarm," he said into the room, voice too loud. "Everything's under control." She didn't look at him. She looked at the stairwell monitor. The feed flickered once, then stabilized. For a single frame, it showed a door that should have been closed standing open. Her pulse stayed even. She knew what came next. When fear failed, confusion would take its place. And someone would try again, louder, faster, closer to the center. She straightened, cleaned blood from her hands, and made a decision she had hoped she wouldn't need to make tonight. She adjusted the device in her pocket, not activating it, just confirming it was there. The early signs were over. The threat had arrived. The silence didn't calm anyone. It made the waiting room brittle. People laughed too loudly, then stopped. A man clapped his hands once, sharp, as if resetting himself. Phones stayed raised, recording nothing, waiting for something to justify the attention. Fear had lost its anchor and was looking for a new one. That was when the lights flickered, just a dip, barely a second, but long enough to trigger memory. Alarms, lockdowns, stories people told themselves when they didn't understand a building. Someone shouted, "What was that?" Before anyone could answer, a different alarm sounded. Not fire, not evacuation. A lockdown tone, low, pulsing, unfamiliar to most of the room. It wasn't meant for them, but they didn't know that. The FBI agent swore and went to his radio. "Control, who authorized lockdown? Say again, who authorized?" The transmission cut mid-sentence. That did it. A man near the entrance yelled, "They're sealing the doors." Whether he believed it or not didn't matter. The words landed and spread. Chairs scraped. A stroller tipped. People surged toward the exits with a force that no signage or training could redirect. "Everyone stay calm." Someone shouted. No one listened. She moved before thinking caught up. Not toward the exits, toward the center. Panic collapsed inward before it exploded outward. If she could slow the center, the edges would follow. She grabbed the nearest wheelchair and turned it sideways, creating a pause in the flow. Not a block, a question. People slowed just enough to reorient. "Fire exits are open," she said, voice steady, carrying without force. "No one is locked in." A man barreled past her anyway, eyes wild. Behind him, someone stumbled. A woman went down hard, shoulder striking tile with a sound she'd remember later. The FBI agent pushed through the crowd, trying to impose order with authority that meant nothing here. "Back up, federal agents," a scream cut him off. "Gun." The word detonated. She knew immediately it was wrong. There was no gun, no pop, no crack, no echo. But panic didn't require evidence, only permission. The surge doubled. She planted her feet and used the wheelchair to redirect bodies away from the stairwell. The stairwell was already at capacity. If it collapsed into itself, people would be crushed before anyone realized what was happening. She locked eyes with a security guard frozen near the wall. "Help me," she said, not a command, a fact. He moved. Together they shifted furniture, creating a wide, slow arc that bled momentum away from the choke point. People followed the path of least resistance, not realizing it had been drawn for them. Her ribs flared with pain as someone clipped her side. She ignored it. Pain was data. She logged it and moved on. Across the room she saw him again, the man from earlier, not running, not helping, watching. He shouted something this time, his voice swallowed by the noise. Two people changed direction in response, peeling off toward the restricted corridor, toward the federal bubble. "No," she said, too quietly for anyone else to hear. She abandoned the wheelchair and cut across the flow, intercepting the pair before they reached the corridor. She didn't touch them. She stepped into their line of sight and became unavoidable. "ICU is closed," she said. "You need to go left." One of them hesitated. The other tried to push past her. She didn't resist. She angled, guiding the push into empty space. The man stumbled, surprised by the lack of opposition, and lost his balance long enough for a guard to grab his arm. The agitator was gone. At the ICU doors, agents scrambled as the pressure reached them. Radios crackled uselessly. Someone tried to override the lockdown and failed. A doctor pounded on the glass, furious. Inside the bubble, fear finally breached discipline. She felt the moment when control slipped not from her but from them. That was the line. She stepped back, reached into her pocket and pressed two fingers flat against the device. No words, no display. Just pressure held for 3 seconds. Then she released it. Nothing happened, at least nothing anyone could see. The panic didn't stop. It couldn't, not yet. Too much momentum, too many bodies already moving. But beneath it, something changed. A frequency shifted. The building's noise reorganized itself. She caught the faintest sound beneath the chaos. A specific radio chirp, wrong for hospital equipment, right for something else. She didn't look for its source. She went back to work. She knelt beside the woman with the injured shoulder, stabilized her, spoke into her ear until the tremors slowed. She directed two bystanders to help without making them feel trapped. She kept her back to the crowd, trusting her position. Around her, the FBI fought the panic like a foreign language. They barked. They blocked. They threatened consequences that meant nothing to people who thought they were about to die. She watched one agent's face as he realized the truth too late. This wasn't an attack on the patient. This was an attack on the environment, and the environment was winning. The lockdown tone cut off abruptly. Silence crashed back in, heavier than before. People froze mid-step, unsure whether to keep running or feel embarrassed for having done so. Someone laughed hysterically. Someone else vomited into a trash can. She stood slowly, every movement deliberate, and scanned the room. The agitator was no longer visible, but the damage was done. The threat had fully arrived, not with a weapon but with fear sharpened into a tool. And now that she had sent the signal, there was no turning back. The room didn't explode again. It sagged. People stood where they had stopped, breathing too fast, eyes darting as if waiting for permission to move. A few sat down hard, legs giving out now that fear no longer needed them upright. The waiting room smelled different, sweat, copper, something sour. The FBI agents regrouped near the ICU doors, voices low and tight. One of them ran a hand through his hair, left it there, gripping his scalp like it might steady him. "This was internal," he said. "Had to be." Another shook his head. "No breach, no weapon." We lost comms for 40 seconds, that's all. 40 seconds was everything. She walked past them carrying a stack of clean linens. No one stopped her. No one looked at her. The bubble had collapsed inward so completely that anything outside it had become invisible. She placed the linens on a chair near the woman with the injured shoulder and checked the sling she'd improvised. The woman winced but nodded, grateful. "Am I okay?" she asked. "You're stable," she replied. "We'll get imaging when it's clear." The truth was quieter. You survived the worst part. Behind her, a voice snapped. "Hey, where are you going?" She turned. The agent who had barked orders earlier stood a few feet away, jaw tight, eyes sharp now, not panicked but searching. He gestured toward the restricted corridor. "Staff stays put. We don't need more movement." She met his gaze without flinching. "People are injured." "We're aware," he said. "Medical response will be coordinated." "Crowds don't wait for coordination," she replied. Still calm, still even, he bristled. "This is a federal operation." She nodded once. "This is a hospital." For a moment, neither of them moved. Around them, the room hummed with restrained motion. Security repositioning, families whispering, a janitor quietly mopping a spill that no one wanted to acknowledge. The agent looked at her badge, then past her as if expecting backup she didn't have. "Did you touch the fire panel?" he asked. "No." "Did you override any systems?" "No." "Then stay in your lane." There it was, not shouted, not cruel, just certain. She felt the ache in her ribs then, deeper now that the adrenaline had thinned. She took a breath through it and let it go. "I'm already in my lane," she said. "You're standing in it." Something flickered across his face, irritation, then doubt. He looked past her to the waiting room, finally seeing what she'd been managing for over an hour. A child asleep against a stranger's shoulder. An elderly man shaking, uninjured but undone. Two security guards quietly arguing about which door to reopen first. He turned back to her. "We had someone inciting this. We need to lock it down completely." "If you do," she said, "they'll push harder next time." He scoffed. "You think there's a next time?" "Yes." That answer cost her. He stepped closer, invading space just enough to assert dominance. "You don't know what you're talking about." She didn't step back. "I know panic," she said. "I know crowds, and I know you're guarding the wrong thing." His eyes narrowed. Explain, she could have. She could have told him about the agitator, the clipboard, the redirected flow, the way the alarms had been layered to confuse rather than evacuate. She could have shown him the stairwell feed glitch she'd caught out of the corner of her eye. She didn't. Because explanation would turn into argument. Argument would turn into delay. And delay would cost someone else blood. Instead, she did something smaller. She pointed not at him but past him, toward the corridor where two agents stood flanking an open door. "That door shouldn't be open," she said. He glanced over his shoulder. "It's authorized." "No," she replied. "It violates pressure protocol. If someone wanted to move air or people through this floor, that's where they'd start." He hesitated, just a fraction. One of the agents at the door spoke into his radio, confused. "Hey boss, we're getting airflow alarms in this wing. That normal?" The agent in front of her stared at her now, really stared. "Who are you?" he asked. She didn't answer, because answering would be a reveal, because reveals change the story. She stepped around him instead, moving toward the door. He caught her arm reflexively, fingers closing on fabric. She stopped, didn't pull away, didn't turn. "Don't," she said quietly, not a threat. A boundary. He released her. The moment hung there, fragile. Then he did something unexpected. He followed. Together they reached the door. She adjusted the vent damper herself, hands sure, movements efficient. The airflow warning on the panel dimmed. Somewhere deeper in the system, pressure equalized. Nothing dramatic happened, which was the point. The agent exhaled slowly. "You should have been in that briefing." "I wasn't invited," she said. He nodded once, stiff. "You cost us time." "And saved you bodies," she replied. That was when the radio chirped again, not the agents, not hospital securities. The same faint, wrong frequency she'd heard earlier, closer now. The agent stiffened. Did you hear that? Yes, he looked at her like he was seeing a map for the first time. What did you do? She met his eyes, steady and tired. I called for help, she said. Not federal, not backup, just help. From down the corridor, footsteps approached, not running, not rushing, controlled. Familiar to her in a way she hadn't let herself feel in years. The first confrontation was over, the cost had been paid, and the night was about to change shape again. The footsteps didn't announce themselves. They never did. They blended into the hospital's existing noise. Rubber soles, distant carts, the muted echo of a stairwell door closing somewhere it shouldn't have been open. Anyone not listening for pattern would miss them entirely. She didn't. She adjusted her stance without looking back, placing herself half a step to the side of the corridor. It gave her sightlines to the waiting room and the ICU doors at the same time. It also kept her out of the way. That was important now. The FBI agent noticed the shift in her posture before he noticed anything else. He had spent years watching people under stress, but this was different. This wasn't tension. This was preparation. "Who did you call?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer right away. She watched a janitor push a cart past the far intersection, head down, movement unremarkable. The cart paused just long enough to avoid a collision with a gurney, then continued. "Too clean." "They're already here," she said. His jaw tightened. "That's not an answer." "No," she agreed. "It's a warning." The waiting room began to move again, not in a surge this time, but in ripples. People shifted in their seats, stood, then sat again. The aftershock of panic worked its way through bodies that hadn't finished processing what had just happened. This was the dangerous part. Fear without direction looked for one. She stepped away from the ICU doors and into the room, deliberately visible now, not commanding attention, occupying space. She lifted a chair that had fallen and set it upright. She adjusted a blanket. She spoke to a man whose hands wouldn't stop shaking until he mirrored her breathing. Small actions, stabilizing actions. Behind her, the FBI agent followed despite himself. "Your perimeter is drawing pressure," she said, low enough that only he could hear. "You're creating a focal point." "We're protecting a witness," he replied. "And exposing everyone else," she said. "That's the trade you didn't calculate." He bristled. "We didn't anticipate panic as a delivery system," she finished for him. "I know." He stared at her. How? She considered lying. Instead, she chose omission. "I've seen it before," she said. "Different building, same physics." They reached the edge of the waiting room. She stopped again, not abruptly but decisively. The agent stopped too, realizing he was now taking cues from her. That realization bothered him. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice. "If you're wrong." "I'm not." She watched the exits. Two were clear. One was beginning to clog as people drifted toward it instinctively. She moved a rolling vital station 5 feet to the left. The flow corrected itself without anyone noticing why. "You need to thin the bubble," she said, quietly. "Pull agents off the doors that don't matter. Leave the ones that do." "Which ones matter?" She pointed, not with her finger but with her chin. A subtle tilt toward a side corridor that looked harmless, unimportant. "That one," she said, "because it's boring. And because it leads nowhere useful unless someone wants to move unseen." The agent hesitated. This was the moment where authority either adapted or broke. He tapped his radio. "Control, reassign 2 from ICU south door to west corridor. Low profile." "Why?" came the reply. "Because I said so," he answered and winced as the words left his mouth. She didn't comment. A nurse passed them, eyes wide. "They're asking questions," she whispered. "People want to know what's happening." "Tell them the truth," she said. "That we're stabilizing." The nurse nodded, relieved to have something to say. At the far end of the room, the man she'd been tracking earlier appeared again. Different jacket now, cap pulled low. He tested the room with his eyes and froze when he saw the shifted exits. The path he wanted was gone. He pivoted. She moved at the same time, not toward him, around him. She closed the distance between him and the security desk without ever facing him directly. She adjusted her pace until she was just ahead of him, forcing him to either slow or reveal himself by pushing past. He slowed, good, the agent saw it then, the invisible choreography, the way the crowd responded to subtle cues, the way one person's choices shaped the movement of dozens. "You're boxing him," he murmured. "Yes." "With what?" She glanced at him. "Patience." The radio chirped again, the wrong frequency, closer still. This time it was answered, not aloud. She felt it more than heard it, a pressure release, a signal acknowledged. A man in hospital scrubs leaned against a wall near the west corridor, pretending to text. Another staff member paused at a supply room door, then continued walking in the opposite direction. They didn't look at her. They didn't need to. The agitator noticed. His breathing changed. He took a step back, then another. The exits he'd been counting on no longer lined up the way they should. He made a choice. He moved toward the ICU, too fast. The FBI agent reacted instinctively, stepping forward, voice rising. "Hey, stop!" The word cut across the room like a thrown object. Heads turned. Momentum spiked. She closed her eyes for half a second. Then she paid the cost. She stepped directly into the agitator's path and took the impact to her already bruised ribs. The pain was sharp enough to steal her breath, but she let herself fall with it, collapsing sideways and dragging him off balance. They went down together, not a tackle, not a fight. An accident. Security was on him instantly. Hands, voices, confusion. The crowd recoiled, unsure whether to surge or retreat. She stayed on the floor longer than she needed to. It bought time. By the time she stood again, the man was gone, escorted through a side corridor by people who hadn't been here 5 minutes ago. The FBI agent stared at her. "You could have been hurt." "I was," she said simply. He swallowed. "You planned that?" "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" She met his eyes, steady despite the pain. "Because you would have tried to stop it." He didn't argue. The room settled, not calm but contained. The panic had lost its driver. Confusion remained, but confusion could be managed. The tactical shift was complete. She leaned against the wall briefly, breathing through the ache. No one offered her a chair. No one noticed she needed one. That was fine. This wasn't over yet. The hardest choice was still ahead. The man was gone, but the shape he left behind remained. Panic never vanished cleanly. It fractured, splitting into confusion, resentment, exhaustion. People searched for someone to blame, someone to explain what they had just felt in their bodies. When no explanation came, fear began to curl inward. That was worse. She leaned against the wall until her breathing steadied, then pushed off before anyone could notice the pause. Pain was manageable. Attention was not. Across the room, a woman raised her voice. "So that's it. Nobody's going to tell us anything." Heads turned. The FBI agent started toward her, already reaching for a rehearsed answer. She intercepted him without touching, angling her body just enough to slow him. "Let me," she said. He hesitated, then nodded once. She addressed the room, not from the center, not from a place of authority, from where she stood, close enough to be human. "Something caused confusion," she said. "It's been handled. If you're hurt, we'll treat you. If you need air, exits are open. No one is trapped here." A few people nodded. A few didn't believe her, but belief wasn't required. Direction was. She saw the next problem before it announced itself. The ICU doors opened. A doctor stepped out, face pale, hands trembling with controlled anger. "They're moving him," she said to no one in particular. "They're taking the patient out." The witness, the bubble was shifting. The FBI agent cursed under his breath. "That wasn't cleared." "Doesn't matter," the doctor replied. "His vitals spiked. If you move him like this, you'll kill him." That was the complication. Panic had failed as a weapon, but it had succeeded as a distraction. Someone, somewhere, had forced the FBI's hand. Now they were about to do the one thing that would reignite everything. She stepped closer to the doctor. "Where?" "Service corridor, elevator 3. The same elevator that had stalled earlier. Her jaw tightened. That corridor is compromised, she said. The agent looked at her sharply. We don't have a choice. You do, she replied. You just don't like it. He lowered his voice. You don't understand what's at stake. She met his gaze steady. You're about to turn this room back into a weapon. Behind them, the waiting room noticed the movement. A gurney rolled into view, flanked by agents. Phones rose again. Whispers followed. Why are they moving him? Is it unsafe? Is this another lockdown? The temperature climbed. She felt the familiar pull, the instinct to take control, to step fully into the role she had spent years keeping buried. It would be easier, faster, clearer. It would also expose everything. She weighed it in a single breath, cost versus consequence. Then she made her choice. She turned to the agent. Give me 90 seconds. He stared. For what? To keep your witness alive, she said, and everyone else breathing. That's not how this works. It is if you let it. The radio chirped the wrong frequency again. This time the response came with weight, a presence she hadn't felt since another building, another night. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. The agent watched her, searching her face. If this goes wrong, it already has, she said. I'm trying to stop it from getting worse. He hesitated. Then he did something that would never make it into a report. He trusted her. 90 seconds, he said into his radio. Hold position. The gurney stopped. Confusion rippled outward, but the pause itself slowed it. People leaned forward, waiting to see what would happen next. She moved fast now, not running but decisive. She crossed to the service corridor entrance and adjusted the lighting panel, dimming it slightly. Lower light reduced agitation. She closed one door and opened another, rerouting foot traffic away from the ICU without explanation. A man in scrubs, one of the quiet arrivals, passed her, carrying nothing, doing nothing remarkable. As he did, he murmured a single word, too soft for anyone else. Confirmed. She didn't respond. At the far end of the waiting room, a woman began to cry, not loud, not performative. The sound spread unease faster than shouting ever could. She approached, knelt, and took the woman's hands. Stay with me, she said, just here. The woman nodded, breath hitching. Behind her, the FBI agent watched the room settle in fragments, not calm but held. The difference mattered. The doctor returned. If we don't move him now, she stood, you'll move him differently. How? She gestured toward a side corridor that hadn't been used in years, marked staff only and forgotten by everyone who didn't work nights. That elevator still works, she said. It's not on your maps. The agent blinked. How do you know that? She didn't answer. They moved, quietly. Carefully, without spectacle. The gurney disappeared down the alternate route, unseen by the waiting room. Phones lowered. Whispers faded into uncertainty. The escalation broke, not with force but with misdirection. She felt the cost then. Her ribs throbbed. Her hands shook for half a second before she stilled them. The weight of what she was doing pressed in, of how close she was to crossing a line she'd sworn never to cross again. The agent approached her once the room had stabilized. What are you? He asked, not unkindly this time. She looked at him, eyes tired, voice level. Someone who knows how this ends if we're not careful. The radio chirped one last time. Then it went silent. The final confrontation was coming, and when it did, she would have to choose how much of herself to reveal to stop it. The building settled into a dangerous calm. Not peace, just a pause where everyone waited for confirmation that the worst was over. The kind of quiet that made people jump at footsteps and stare too long at doors. She stood near the service corridor, close enough to intervene, far enough to remain unnoticed. Her ribs burned with each breath now. The pain had sharpened, focused. Manageable, but it demanded attention. She denied it. The FBI agent returned from the stairwell, expression stripped of pretense. The witness is secure. Off the main grid for now. For now is enough, she said. He nodded, then lowered his voice. We traced the calm disruption. It wasn't external. She waited. It came from inside the building, he continued. Short range, adaptive. Whoever did it knew hospital infrastructure. Yes, she said. And knew our protocols, he added. They wanted us to tighten up to make the crowd do the rest. She turned to face him fully for the first time. Crowds don't need much help, she said. Just a reason. A radio crackled nearby, hospital security this time. We've got a disturbance near radiology, possible medical emergency. She felt it before the words finished. That's the last move, she said. The agent stiffened. You're sure? They lost their driver, she replied. Now they need a reason to pull resources. They moved together, not speaking. Down corridors that smelled of disinfectant and old air, past rooms where patients slept through history shifting around them. Radiology was dim, half-lit for night staffing. A man lay on the floor near the entrance, clutching his chest, breathing shallow and fast. A small crowd hovered, uncertain. Classic. The agent started forward. She caught his sleeve lightly, just enough to stop him. Watch, she said. She knelt beside the man, ignoring the flare of pain in her ribs. Sir, she said calmly, can you tell me where it hurts? The man nodded too fast. Chest, can't breathe. She took his wrist, fingers finding a pulse that was rapid but strong. Too strong. His eyes flicked to the corridor, then back to her. Panic performance. She didn't call him out. She leaned closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. You don't need to do this, she said. His breath stuttered. Whoever told you this would work, she continued, already failed. The agent watched, confused. The man's eyes widened just a fraction. She straightened and spoke louder now for the room. I need space, now. People backed away instinctively, authority without volume. She turned back to the man. I'm going to help you stand, she said, slowly. He shook his head, suddenly uncertain. The script had changed. That was when the final piece moved. From the far corridor, a woman stepped into view, plain clothes, no badge visible, phone pressed to her ear. She froze when she saw the room wasn't reacting the way it should. Too late. Two hospital staff appeared behind her, blocking the exit without blocking it. One of them met her eyes briefly, then looked away. The woman turned to run. The FBI agent was faster. He intercepted her without violence, guiding her into a wall with practiced control. FBI, he said quietly, don't move. The room erupted, not in panic but noise, questions, shouts, confusion. She stayed with the man on the floor as security arrived. The man stopped clutching his chest and began to cry, not theatrically, but with the sudden collapse of effort. I didn't think anyone would get hurt, he said. She believed him. You still did, she replied. But you stopped before it got worse. He nodded, ashamed. The agent returned, breath steady, eyes sharp. She was coordinating it, he said, using medical scares to redirect attention, not a shooter, not a bomb, just pressure. She stood slowly, wincing despite herself. That's how you stop armed people without weapons, she said. You make them hurt themselves. He studied her. You saw it coming. Yes, you could have stopped it earlier. She met his gaze, not without making it worse. He absorbed that. Around them, order reasserted itself. Stretchers rolled, radios normalized, the building exhaled. The final confrontation had ended without a fight. That was the victory. The agent looked at her for a long moment. You sent a signal, he said, not a question. Yes. To who? She considered him. Considered the cost of one more truth. People who know how to listen, she said. He nodded slowly. You're not just a nurse. She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it either. The ambulance lights outside washed briefly through the corridor windows, red then gone. The crisis was already becoming paperwork. She turned back toward the waiting room, back toward her work. The agent called after her once. They'll ask who handled this. She paused, hand resting briefly against her ribs. Tell them the hospital did, she said. And then she walked away, quiet hands returning to loud hallways, leaving the spotlight exactly where it belonged, out of reach.